Hello and welcome. This is the Climate Voices podcast, and I'm your host, Omesa Mokaya. I'm pleased to welcome you to the third episode of our podcast that is bringing together various climate champions that have been addressing climate change to share their positive stories and experiences. With our guests from across the planet, we'll be unpacking the complicated climate science one conversation at a time to make sure that we're leaving no one behind in the fight against climate change. On this episode, we are joined on the show by an amazing guest that is doing a lot of work in addressing climate change in different capacities, Mr. Paul Mutuku. To briefly introduce Paul, he's a Kenyan-based young climate advocate and an environmental defender working to champion meaningful youth engagement for climate action. He has experience in community organizing, climate communication, campaign coordination, environmental education, among other areas. He is a digital storyteller and a trained environmental educator with Arocha International under the Education for Sustainable Development. Paul is a regional Director for Africa at Youth for Nature. His key focus for Africa is on nature-based solutions, land restoration, reforestation, ecological farming, and youth leadership across the spaces. He's also the Global Youth Ambassador at Global Evergreening Alliance. Welcome, Mr. Paul. Could you briefly take us through what you're doing specifically at the moment in addressing the climate crisis?
Yes, thank you again, Mokaya. It's a pleasure to be here. And just to quickly mention about my current work. So, an Africa Director at Youth for Nature, and Youth for Nature is an international youth-led organization that works with young people to empower them and build their capacity as equal leaders for both the nature and climate crisis. And we do this through storytelling, of course, capacity building and knowledge sharing, recognizing that we need to exchange the knowledge that young people from across regions in the world are having, and we need to tell these stories in all the different formats. So that's one of the things that I'm doing at Youth for Nature in Africa, but also I'm a co-founder and executive director of Kenya Environmental Action Network. In short, we are called KEAN, and one big program we've been running in Kenya is called Bustani Gardens. And through Bustani, we actually seek to engage learners and communities on practical and experiential installation of gardens for vegetables and fruits, but also for indigenous trees, so that we inculcate and create that culture of restoration and mutual understanding on where humanity needs to connect with nature, and why we need to empower the young generation to grow up knowing the importance of connecting the soil to biodiversity and to our own human livelihood and well-being. So that is a bit about what I'm doing, and I'm happy to share more as we continue the discussion.
I picked something about storytelling. So, is there a specific audience you target with your communication work?
Yeah, so at Youth for Nature, our storytelling program is actually pretty much what we started with since 2019 when we were founded. And back then, the idea was to really reach out to young people from across the world that were working on land restoration, like environmental protection, or even advocacy campaigns in their communities to share their stories and their stories of impact. And then we were working to compile these stories and take them to New York for the first ever, youth summit before the UN SDGs, summit in New York. And again,
I actually remember we met there for the first time.
Yeah, and I met with you. And I think this was a very big campaign because it actually, in Africa, we had a global submission of 90 stories, and over half of these stories are coming from Africa, stories that young people are telling on how the climate crisis is impacting them, but also stories on how they are creating solutions with their communities around, the imminent crisis. And to me, this represents the hope that storytelling can give us. And we've seen it amongst young people, amongst indigenous communities, and amongst many people on the ground. And we need to reach out to them and ensure that we capture their stories as it is and tell the world as it needs to be told.
Yeah, one thing I've realized in this space is that the kind of work that, for example, you're doing, or the kind of work that the young people are doing, is it seldom gets to the mainstream media because they're busy, covering stories. It doesn't look like catchy in quotes and quotes. So I really like what you're doing about storytelling. The work that you mentioned you do, like the one you presented in New York, is there like there's something that you can say, the kind of impact that you've brought from your storytelling campaign?
Yeah, thank you. Just starting from New York, we actually had a week-long exhibition to really allow stakeholders, both government, corporate world, civil society, and also the UN fraternity, to walk through our exhibitions and actually see what young people are doing. And the idea we had was that if we spotlight young people, then these stakeholders get the opportunity to know what is happening, and then they can directly influence how financing is being done for restoration, for conservation, and of course, for the new idea of nature-based solutions. So one of the impact was actually getting to communicate with a wider audience in the donor community and in the civil society, that allowed us to then communicate and connect more with especially global south-based organizations. And so from New York, we were able to scale up our storytelling program. And now we've actually conducted several campaigns, Youth for Nature, allowing young people to come and share their stories, contribute to our story map. And we do actually have our website dedicated to a story map where we can view all these stories of change from young people across the world. But again, another impact, I think, it's how we have this micro grants program, where through nature competitions, we set up some campaigns, and then we allow young people to submit, and there are some grants, small grants of course, that are given to them to help scale up their work and to help improve the solutions they are doing on the ground. So I'd say these are some of the impacts, and of course the opportunity to contribute towards creating more diverse stories on what's happening on the ground, and then allowing youth to connect from anywhere in the world on what is possible where, and how can I learn from this to continue the work that I'm doing on the ground.
Yeah, so this storytelling is not just centered in Kenya, it's just across the world.
Yes, it's a global storytelling program, again, because Youth for Nature in its nature is a global youth-led organization. So even our approach to storytelling has been global to that effect.
That's amazing. So in the beginning, you also mentioned something about Bustani Garden. So can you briefly talk about that?
Yeah.
And the kind of impact that you've had with the Bustani. I remember like sometime, was it in May? Yeah, I joined you to Kakamega Primary School, where we did something with the kids. Yeah, it was really amazing. I was impressed with the impact that brought. So if you can briefly talk about that, and if you've done that in other areas, what you see are other opportunities that we can scale that up to other areas that young people can listen to.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Mokaya. And just to start on this, Bustani is the Swahili word that means garden. So KEAN has been implementing this KEAN Bustani Gardens, which is an idea to again deliver and implement experiential conservation education learning with learners in either primary or high schools, but also communities that we are visiting to across Kenya. And the main thing is there's a lot of environmental talks, but we are not engaging on practical processes and practices to really exchange the knowledge. I don't believe people don't know. I know people know, but it's a question of how do we practically show it on the ground. So through the Bustani Gardens, we are able to connect with learners in both primary schools, high schools, and the communities around them on what it means to take care of the environment, what it means to set up a vegetable and fruit garden, what it means to actually start an indigenous tree hub or tree nursery in a school. So we've been able to at least install around 5 Bustanis across different counties in Kenya. And of course, you joined us in Kakamega. We've done one in Kenyan's coast, a school called Amani Primary School. We've done one in Eastern Kenya, St. John's Primary School, which I also believe you joined us.
Machakos, right?
In Machakos. Yeah, we've done another one in Eldoret, a children's home. We've done another one actually in Meru, and then we plan to do one in northeastern Kenya. The hope is we are able to at least have Bustanis in all the 47 counties in Kenya and allow learners to actually interact with the Bustanis in their school, understand how, what it takes to install and set up a vegetable and fruit garden, what it means to even plant and take care of an indigenous trees, and the associated ecosystem services, and also human based benefits from such an approach of conservation, and in the long run hoping that we can really connect with Kenya's education system and help the government also deliver our kind of curriculum, so that we then create the next generation of restoration and conservation leaders in the country, and in the long run contributes to towards Kenya's commitment to reduce carbon emissions by now 32% by the year 2030. So that is a bit about Bustani, and we've installed around 5 Bustanis, and we hope to scale it more and install in all 47 counties in Kenya.
Is there a time scale that you're looking at?
Not really. I mean, of course, the sooner the better, but we want to work with realities. Of course, our Bustanis are based on financing, so we are also actively fundraising to ensure we get enough funds to be able to plan for every school that we are going to visit, because of course there's a labor cost, buying the materials, visitations, then you have to buy a few other items for the schools because of their different needs. So this then means we have to actively fundraise, which is what we are doing currently, so that we can strategically plan for every school, every county, and every community that we are planning to do outreach and implementation at.
I really like what you're doing around empowering young people. I remember, coming into this space, into the environmental conservation space. I actually found myself, when I left high school, I really didn't know before that environment is a thing. I used to love trees and stuff. I come from the highlands, Kisii Highlands. It's a super green area, but about conservation, I actually took it as a career. Yeah, I don't know if because I lacked options, I wanted to be a doctor some time back, but I thank God I didn't. But because I couldn't save people, now I'm saving the planet. Yeah, which I think is actually better. I like the idea of working with the young generation, because we say now the future belongs to us. Getting the young people to have that nature in them from the young age of taking care of the environment, and installing the Bustani gardens in the primary schools, especially with the kids. I saw how passionate they are in Kakamega. They know in them that they grow up knowing that they have to take care of the environment for the environment to take care of them, because actually, as we have seen from the strikes, the global strikes that emanated from the young people, is that the older generation is failing us, and it's our time to stand up as young people, because the future belongs to us. Yeah. So you've mentioned a lot of things that you're doing. I picked something you talked about, financing as a major impediment to this work. I know the World Bank is doing a lot of work, around financing climate action. Locally, there's something called FLOCA. I don't know if you've heard of it. Especially working through the counties. So I'm just curious: are you, working with the counties, or just working specifically with the communities? In addressing climate change.
Yeah, of course. And before I answer that, let me also say that I had bigger ambitions as well, to either be a pilot or be a doctor.
Yeah, it's good to be ambitious. Yeah. I mean, it's for every young person.
I know, but my ambition actually turned me into being I'm an environmental doctor. Just like you say, now we are actually healing the planet and healing communities, which is okay. But yeah, when it comes to financing and collaborations with the governments, we've actually tried to, when we go to some of these counties, of course, one of the stakeholders you have to think about is the county and the local leadership. So in some of the counties like Kisumu, we actually directly worked with the Ministry of Environment to come and install the the Bustanis, and really have their active leadership in mainstreaming and pushing for the Bustani that was being installed in one of the schools there. In other counties, we've tried to reach out and engage, but at times government has bureaucracy and processes, so it might not be ideal that we end up working with them. But for the communities that we don't manage to work with the counties, we still go with the rest of the stakeholders there. But definitely in the end, we do, like I mentioned, we want to also see how it can be mainstreamed into the mainstream education curriculum. So that speaks to how we can plan it well and share our content with the counties and the government to have it enrolled into the formal curriculum, or as a complementary curriculum that we can offer, now that we're talking about competence-based curriculum, then how do we actually also work with the government to do this? So I'll say it's a work in progress. We've had some good relationships, some county governments, definitely not with all of them, but we continue to see how we can engage and do more outreach to have meaningful participation of the government in a very key school-based program.
Yeah, so, talking about curriculum development, so do you see in a future where we're going to have environmental education or climate studies or climate change being taught in, primary schools and I don't know?
Yes, Mokai, I think a very short answer, I think that's yes, it's already, the future is now, it's already happening. Yeah. And the fact that, some of the schools actually allow us to have entry into their facilities and offer these to their learners, it just shows that actually this is much needed. Communities are ready, schools are ready, so it's only in the best interest of the school and the learners to avail and ensure environment is a program and a subject that is part of the mainstream subjects and part of the mainstream school program. So I think it's already happening. It's a question of how can they scale up, how can they fasten and make sure it's mainstream throughout students, school life.
We'll be happy to, see the programs up and running, and we'll be, happy to say that Paul took part in this. the young
As
children.
Grow older.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, amazing. Mr. Paul, so you talked about some work that you're doing, especially with Youth for Nature, around nature-based solutions. I'm sure not everyone understands what nature-based solutions is. This is a term that has come with the advent of, the changing climate. So everyone is trying to come up with terms, and, sometimes we talk of climate-smart agriculture, we talk of agroforestry, we talk of ecological farming. There are all these new terms coming. So if you can briefly, talk about what nature-based solutions is and kind of work that you've been able to do around that, especially in, forestation and landscape restoration. Yeah.
Okay, of course, definitely. And I think just a quick, I may not give the full explanation or definition of nature-based solutions. But
I mean, for layman.
But I think for layman's understanding, actually, nature-based solutions have formally just, been introduced into the climate discourse not more than 5 years or 6 years ago. But these are things that have actually been happening since time immemorial. Indigenous communities and the first communities to inhabit the planet who are more like, engaging on a farm-to-table diet and farm-to-table practices which are more localized and utilizing on the power of nature, not extractive, but really using the resources that they are available to benefit humanity, but also contribute towards sustainably being able to get it more from the environment while taking care of it. So formally, nature-based solutions have then been defined as actions to protect, sustainably manage, or restore modified or intact ecosystems. Of course, cognizant of that fact that you have to attain both livelihoods for human beings, but also ecosystem benefits. So there's that bit of connotation between nature and humanity. And when you think of it, actually that is what indigenous communities have been doing to protect forests, be it in Kenya, in the Mau. Most of the Ogiek and other indigenous communities have actually been leave alone, having some sites for, beehives and everything to get some foods from them. They have been the custodians to protect these natural ecosystems, and that's why now we have intact forests, we have lakes, we have wetlands, we have rivers that we can actually call rivers because of the kind of indigenous knowledge and protection that these communities have been able to secure and ensure since those times. So this is the basis of nature-based solutions for us. And at Youth for Nature, there are a few things that we've been able to do, and I'm happy to just announce a program that we are about to pilot here in Kenya next year. It's called Inuka. Again, Inuka is a Swahili word that means to rise up in English. So we intend to implement a program with at least 5 youth-led nature-based solutions programs from different ecosystems and landscapes in Kenya, on 1.5 years to really introduce them to nature-based solutions standard by IUCN, give them mentorship and nature-based solutions best practice training, offer mentorship training again to the same youth groups on how they can really scale up and enhance implementation on the ground for nature-based solutions, but also offer some small grants, because again, from what I mentioned before, financing seems to be a really critical issue that is impacting and affecting youth-led initiatives when it comes to climate change and adaptation, right? So part of the program will be to also capacitate the youth and give them some small grants to be able to scale up their work, so that then, they enhance the impact on the ground. And then lastly, we hope to actually undertake a very strong multimedia communications campaign that will help us to tell the story of what it feels and how young people are actually leading on nature-based solutions implementation across Kenya is a pilot country, and then the opportunity for us to mainstream and fundraise more to scale it across Africa. So after the pilot is over, we hope to have then done more fundraising to open it up across other African countries, and therefore deliver Africa as a nature-based solutions youth-led program that will impact and give financing and capacity to youth to be able to do more nature-based solutions and landscape restoration initiatives, in this decade that we are calling the UN decade of, ecosystem restoration. So that's a bit about what we're doing at Youth for Nature. And I quickly just mentioned another avenue where we are engaging on nature-based solutions. The Global Evergreen Alliance, which is an organization that is headquartered in Australia. And I'm Australia. Yes, I'm an ambassador at the Global Evergreening Alliance, in short GEA. And just this year, they actually managed to get a fund that is going. It's called Restore Africa program. So they are going to implement nature-based solutions in the form of farmer-managed natural regenerations. In other words, working with farmers and communities on the ground that are doing farming on how they can promote agroforestry practices, protect the trees, especially native trees around their farms, while still growing their cash crops and therefore helping to enhance biodiversity protection, in the next 5 years. So it's like $150 million investment that will be running in around 6 sub-Saharan African countries, including Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, I believe there's Tanzania, and a few other to comprise the first pilot. And then from there, there'll be more scale up across other African countries. So you see there's a lot of interest in Africa, a lot of interest in land restoration using nature-based solutions. And I believe the youth have a big opportunity to really tap into it and see how we can engage meaningfully and support, while also getting the benefits of such kind of engagement in nature-based solutions approaches.
Yeah, what I'm reading from that, it's a lot of opportunities for young people, especially you mentioned things about capacity building. There's all this fundraising that you've been doing you mentioned about the Inuka program targeting young people. So I mean, we have all these opportunities that we have for young people to take part in the conservation space. Especially what you mentioned is a new term that hasn't been in the in the space for quite a lot of time. It's 5 years nature-based solution. You mentioned also about communication, which is something I'm really so passionate about. Yeah, because what we are doing, your work, especially what you have said, it's about working with the communities. I love working with communities. I've worked with a lot of communities, especially from the lower eastern parts of Kenya, which is either arid or semi-arid, in especially tackling the impacts of climate change. These are communities which are so impacted by climate change. And communication, sometimes it reminds me for a time in 2019 when I was working in Kisii. And one thing I realized, it was a campaign on climate finance. One thing I realized is that the people in the communities really want to act, but they don't know. It's how we package the information that is really the problem. We come up with these big terms, nature-based solutions, climate change and all stuff, climate science. But the people at the grassroots, they know what's happening, but not in terms of how we package the information. Communication is very critical. One thing I did is, talking about climate change in vernacular. this campaign that you mentioned about communication, multimedia communication, is something that I see an opportunity for young people, especially you and the young people that you are mentoring, and the rest of us who've been in this space for some time. It's an opportunity for us to break down environmental conservation, climate change, and all these big terms. Try to break that down into a language that the people at the grassroots, not just the young people, the young kids who are coming up, but also the rural communities, the indigenous people, in a manner that they can understand and also want to take part. Some part of principles of environmental education is getting the people to be aware and to be able to take part in what you're doing,
and to be co-leaders in, I think, just the the development and also the implementation of such a program. And one thing about Inuka is actually that we've also set aside some budget for translation, because like you're saying, I believe it's very important for local communities to own the process, right? And it's important for them to also tell their stories. So I think, like you're saying, one of the problems you have with such amazing restoration and environmental initiatives, like who gets to tell the story and how do they get to tell the story. And one of the issues we've seen in the past is how, I'm sorry but not sorry to say this, that most global north and white-led organizations from the west will come to Africa and try to implement very nice fancy worded restoration on environmental social projects. But when you get to the heart and the meat of this, you realize actually most of them set in some very big offices. Let me use the example of Washington, maybe DC, and then they thought of a problem for hunger-stricken or drought-stricken country like Kenya, and then what is the solution? Let's go and give them food aid, or let's go and support with more tree planting. But the question is, have you actually consulted to know what the community wants? Have you allowed the community, the impacted community, to tell you what their primary concerns are? And that's why you find at times some of these programs, they seldom succeed. Why? Because number one, you don't even involve the very community.
It's top down.
Exactly. And the community has to be like in ownership of these projects. So if you miss them when you started the program, then you miss them in the long run. And I think, like you're saying, that's why it has to be a bottom-up approach, a community engagement, exactly, program and process for us to ensure we conserve. And of course, finally, to just say that restoration cannot work without communities. It can't work without indigenous communities. And in Africa, I don't believe it can work without young people, because of course it comprise the most youthful region, and it's only in the best interest of the world and African leaders in this case to actually tap into the power, energy, and potential, and of course creativity that African youth are presenting, and then be able to co-lead and co-design and co-implement solutions to both our nature and climate crisis. Only then can we achieve the African dream on a better, sustainable continent for all.
Very strong information there, very strong message that we have to involve the communities. We have to have these initiatives emanating from the communities. We have to have that aspect of community ownership. That's the only way that we're going to have all these initiatives that we're doing being owned by the communities and being successful in terms of seeing the impact that we want to see in addressing climate change. So recently attended the Africa Protected Areas Congress in Kigali, I believe, right? I believe you got an opportunity to meet other young people, not just from Kenya, but from the rest of Africa and other regions. Like this is a good avenue for young people to share ideas and try to pick the best practices of how other young people are addressing these issues that we're talking about. So is there something that you picked in particular that you want to talk about?
Exactly. I think number one, to just mention that I believe APAC Congress was an amazing Congress. It was a much needed regional forum, because I think I was actually surprised and struck that it took so many years for us to have the first ever, what is being called the inaugural conservation forum in Africa for a region that is so big. It was the first, actually. You'll be surprised, It's so big in terms of landmass, it's an opportunity for restoration, population, so many resources. So you imagined that we could have had so many of such forums happening before. But that notwithstanding, I'm happy that it happened. And then Kigali, Rwanda, and Kigali in this matter, being the host, was very phenomenal to us as African youth and African leaders in conservation. And one thing that I picked out of the conference and conversations was how, like, African leaders actually doing a lot. African youth and civil society is doing a lot. Of course, not what to the extent that it's needed, but it's a lot of work happening on the ground. And the Kigali call to action mostly centers around what I just mentioned before, like ensuring that we center indigenous communities, youth and local communities that are at the center of conservation, making sure that we do have the free, prior, and informed consent when we approach these communities with the goal of, a restoration and conservation agenda, right? If we kick them out of the territories they've been conserving and protecting for us, then what are we doing? So one of the key issues around the Kigali call to action was actually ensuring that we center communities and ensure we engage them, right, and respect their rights, and work with them as equal players in the implementation phase of what is now instituted as the APACT, Africa Protected Areas Conservation Trust, and you'll be surprised it's actually being financed by African heads of state and states to be part of the implementation of the future of Africa's conservation. The final thing I think I want to mention is this Congress had a very huge African youth turnout, and for me, I think that's encouraging because I believe you've also actually been part of these big global conferences. There's the youth factor that always misses, and if you find youth, just a few youth that are selected to tick the box, but with APAC, there was really that meaningful and deliberate engagement of young people, and I believe that this sets the base for Africa's next frontier in conservation agenda, and I think it was really much needed and it was impactful, and we cannot afford to not celebrate this big moment for Africa.
Wow, big moment for Africa and for the young people from Africa. Yeah, so do you think, you mentioned earlier that these organizations from the global north were leading, conservation work in Africa, which sometimes the agenda is not rhyming with the needs of the people, the communities. That's one of the biggest challenges that we have in international development that we're trying to address, is to make sure that our initiatives are coming from the ground, and whatever projects we are doing, like what you're doing with the Bustani, the Inuka project and all that, they're actually addressing what the people need. And you mentioning that this conference that gave the young people from Africa space to air their views and present what they think needs to be done to address the conservation challenges, the climate change challenges that we're facing in Africa. We have seen a case like, for example, the Conference of Parties, the UNFCCC, where young people have resorted to affirmative action. It's just about protest and stuff, because they're not getting a space at the table to air their views. I'm happy that you are reporting that this conference was one of a kind. It's a success for Africa. So this is something that you're saying, the rest of the world can borrow from, in giving the young people the space to, give their views and contribute to
and
that.
to meaningfully contribute,
So one thing we also want to do with this kind of work is not just to, work in the communities and our work goes unrecognized. We also want to be part of, influencing the policy making processes. We want to have the, back the power that we deserve. So as your work being able to, influence policy making processes, especially at the county levels. I know, issues around climate change and environment, especially here in Kenya, it's a default form of it's a default function of the national government. There may be some of the policies that you've been able to influence in these counties that you have been working in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as I respond to this, I'll also say that of course we do recognize, like my statement before about global north organizations, some coming and then not aligning with the local initiatives and the needs. And of course it's not all organizations, but I'm not sorry to say that there are global north organizations that have done that. I'm not shy to say that. But of course that does not put all global north organizations in that one basket. We still have good that ones that are good and doing a lot of work. In terms of policy influence and everything, I think I first quickly mention about a project that Youth for Nature Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and Nyungo, which is the official youth constituency on climate change, right? UNFCCC. So around also nature-based solutions.
UNFCCC is the United Nations
Framework Convention on Climate Change. Sorry for the acronym. Yeah. So we actually collaborated on a joint partnership on nature-based solutions. Of course, the IUCN nature-based solution standard was launched in 2020, and of course, the very first standard to guide our nature-based solutions to be implemented, and the standards and the indicators. But then one component that we wanted to be sure is actually like, what's the place of young people, what's the place of indigenous communities, and how we are addressing some justice related issues and land rights around exactly all those things which we felt were really missing on this standard and in the definition also itself. So we undertook a project to, number one, help break down these highly jargonized text on nature-based solutions to allow young people to first understand what it is actually and what are the cases that you can attribute nature-based solutions to. And then after that, we developed that info pack to help young people understand what nature-based solutions is. And from there, then we went further to launch a survey to have young people really respond on like what definition do you even think nature-based solutions should be given? What are some of the key attributes and factors that should be considered while having a unified definition for the term? And then of course, like in terms of youth engagements, right? What are things that for young people, indigenous communities need to be part of this standard and the definition, and then like land rights and some of safeguards that we need to put even when we talk about restoration. Are we doing it at the expense of local indigenous communities? Are we doing it at the expense of the youth and our farmers and foresters who are doing the amazing work for protection and restoration? Then after that, then we actually organized a very big side event at COP27 in Glasgow last year, where we launched the first ever global youth statement on nature-based solutions. And that's like available.
I was actually going to ask if you're taking part in that.
Yeah, we did actually. Youth for Nature, one of the lead partners on that. And right now, the material and information is out there for any young person to contribute to. You can still engage with the standard and like the youth statement and help us understand whether it's working for you. What are some of the things from the region and from your countries you can really utilize the material to influence our policies on nationally determined contributions and climate goals. So that's one of the projects we've been able to do. And again, I'll also mention for KEAN, Kenya Environmental Action Network, in the year 2020, just around the time Kenya was about to submit our revised national determined contributions. So we also had an opportunity to also collaborate and work with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, I believe also the British High Commission and a few other stakeholders, to really like have a serious dialogue for a week with young people on NDCs, and then what does this mean for us? What are the opportunities for implementation, and how can young people be equal, stakeholders in the implementation phase of this important commitment to the UNFCCC framework? So we were able to conduct that, and of course our recommendations fed into the second NDC just in time before it was actually submitted to the UNFCCC registry. So that's one of the ways, and of course we've tried to also host some local conferences of the youth to really help with the climate agenda in Kenya, to help push for more youth engagement, inclusion. But of course, in terms of the 10% forest cover, what we're doing with Bustani gardens, it's part of the policy implementation that actually we are contributing to the country, and of course again offering Bustani in a very experiential way that you can use our Climate Change Act 2016 in Kenya to really engage learners on the climate change issues in Kenya, but also the solutions and ways that we can really ensure that these policies transform into action and they are centered around communities, and communities are doing something to really give life to the policies that are set by our country. So yes, there are some actions, and we are not stopping. We are still continue to do the good work that I believe we are doing on the ground.
A lot of actions, actually, not some. It's a lot of actions that you're doing. And what amazes me most is that most of these actions you're actually talking about, they're not just impacting Kenya as a country, but also Africa, given that you're carrying your voice to these international conferences like the Conference of Parties that is happening in November in Egypt, which you have mentioned that you're taking part in. So actually talking of that, So is there a specific message that, especially now that we've been, we earlier we said that young people are not involved in most of these conferences, like the one that you had in Kigali. Now that this one is actually happening in Africa, do you see this as an opportunity for young people from Africa, to rise up and say, it's our time to shine?
Exactly, that's a very good question, Mokaya. I just say that I think it's always been Africa's youth time, I believe.
It's
but
always
of course,
our time.
yeah, it's always our time, really. I think there's never tomorrow, there's never yesterday, it's today. But I agree with you that these conference is coming to Africa, so we have to own it and all that. So I'm happy to quickly report to you and our viewers or listeners from any part of the world that KEAN managed to actually successfully fundraise for a project. We're calling it Africa Youth Caravan to COP27. It will be a decentralized project, and decentralized caravan, to bring together our youth action and movements from all regions in the continent to serious discussions around climate action, the solutions we are giving, ranging from food systems to water security to livelihoods and really land restoration, just energy transition, and how we can then build it up towards COP27. So already we are thinking of starting the workshops by September, and then we'll have a delegation of 20 African youth from all these different parts of the region to represent the peers, exactly, at COP27 in Sharm El Sheikh. And for me, I think that's a big opportunity. We are really just a national-based initiative, not even an organization, right? Yeah. And we are able to bring at least 20 youth to such a global discourse. That's like some impact, right? Exactly. Thank you. So we plan on doing this, and I believe that actually, and I know there are more other caravans that are happening, and there are more projects that are really trying to bring African youth voice to the global arena at COP27. And I think, to answer your question, yes, there's a lot in that. It's a moment for African youth to again take ownership of the process and to guide the climate agenda in Africa. And for us, we are doing that bit. And we do hope we can connect with more stakeholders, more organizations that are doing this, and really being part of this amazing journey for us. I'll quickly finalize by saying that once the 20 delegates are in Egypt, we plan on having some 3-day workshop in Cairo, and then potentially having some in-person caravan, and then in a green bus or in some walk towards Sharm, and then in Sharm we'll have some camels, to just have some nice entry into the COP27 venue, have some media briefing to present African statement to presidency, but also to ensure that this material goes beyond COP, that it's a lasting and focusing material that African youth can use to effect the actions on the ground and really to impact the solutions and the like commitments that the world is giving and all leaders are giving, and also to ensure that we empower these youth to further continue acting on the ground and knowing that their story matters, their action matters, and if we can't tell it, no one else will tell it. And I'm happy to say that from what you said, it's Africa's time. It's always been Africa's time, and African youth need to really rise up to the agenda, take it with both hands, walk with both legs, and go represent in Egypt.
Amazing. I call that a call to action. It's Africa's time. It's Africa's time for young people to shine. Let's make our voices heard.
Exactly. Let's make our voices
and let's
heard.
hope this is the last time we're saying it's Africa's time. Let this be the last Africa's time. Let it get the impact that we want to see.
Yes.
Any last call to action you have for the older generation, for the policymakers, for the young people, for the global north, for anyone that you want to speak to?
Well, look here.
Come to the end
yes,
of this.
okay. I believe we can't be a planet if we leave anyone behind, and I think one thing that African youth are showing, and through your podcast you're also showing, is that power of collaboration and engagements and partnership. So my call to action, of course, for young people, world leaders and other stakeholders, let's continue coming together, let's merge our efforts, and let's work on a system that makes the world a better place, that makes sure that we don't have a global north and a global south. Why not just
But
have
we
a
have
global,
one
you know,
planet.
like let's just have, of course, we have one planet. Can we do our actions to really make this only habitable planet the best planet to be? And can we make sure that planet Earth is the heaven that we so seek to go to after we die? Let us live
Amen.
in this heaven before we go to whichever other place we believe we'll go to once we die. And then lastly, to our young people across the world, let us be encouraged that our work matters, and we will always find light at the end of the tunnel. So whatever small action you're doing, it's about the story of the hummingbird. Do your little thing, I do my little thing, Mokaya does his little thing. And when all these little things are joined or combined together, we'll have a lot of amazing impact, and we'll transform the world to a point that the future generation might just be surprised and give us a tap, even in a spiritual form.
Amazing. In the spirit of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, you said, leave no one behind.
Exactly.
And I love the story of the hummingbird. That's amazing. Yeah, it's been amazing, Paul, having you on the show. Thank you so much for your contribution to this. I wish we could have all the time we need. You know, we could be talking about all these things all day, but we'll reserve that for next time.
Yeah.
It's been amazing. I just hope this message gets to all the people that we're targeting, and this time we see action. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. I encourage you to keep looking up, look out for the future guests that we'll be hosting, and the kind of information they'll be sharing about what they're doing, because we'll not stop here. Like Paul said, we'll continue doing it until we see the impact that we want to see, until we make planet Earth the best, the best planet that we want to live in.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so until next time, I've been your host, Omesa Mokaya, and thank you, Paul Kaloki.
And thank you for hosting me, Mokaya. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah, so until next time, our listeners, bye-bye.